May God continue, for long as the world continues, Dr. Stan, to give us people like you. Now, I will tell you that when Stan was considering this event this year, he wanted to make it particularly beneficial. And so he got together with his planners and he said, well, what can we do to make the 2009 Radio Liberty Conference the best it has ever been before? And they said, here's what we will do. We will call and we will invite the most intellectual man in the United States of America to come and to speak at Radio Liberty. And so they called the most intellectual man in the United States. Unfortunately, he declined. So they said, well, if we can't have the most intellectual man in the United States of America, what will we do? They said, well, here's what we will do. We will call and we will invite the most articulate speaker in the United States to present this year at Radio Liberty. So they contacted the most articulate speaker. Unfortunately, he declined. And then finally they said, well, look, if we cannot have the most intellectual man in the United States of America, and if we cannot have the most articulate speaker in the U.S., then here's what we will do. We will call and we will invite the most handsome man in America. And of course I accepted. And the main reason, Dr. Bennett, the main reason that I did, I just couldn't bring myself to turn poor Stan down 3 times in a row like that. So I accepted. And if for those of you who may doubt it, that was a joke. Now, as I get started this afternoon with the real presentation, I want to tell you, originally when I was invited to speak here, and some of you may have even remembered some of the old advertisements, I was going to talk about the subject of biotechnology and transhumanism. Biotech, of course, being one of the emerging fields of science, that transhumanists, which is also an emerging relatively new field of philosophy, but it's not the lunatic fringe. Of course, some of the lunatic fringe are part of it, and I guess one could argue that even those who are among the academics in the universities are also lunatics. But there's a great deal of PhDs behind this movement today, and law schools and laws that are being formed, because these people imagine using now these emerging fields of science, biotechnology, nanotechnology, neuropharmacology, genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, mind uploading, mind downloading, RFID, implant technology. They imagine using these fields of science in order to alter what it means to be a human. They really do view this as the next step in human evolution. And that through the adaptation of these new fields of science, they are transhumans en route to becoming post-humans, even to altering our DNA, literally rewriting what God made, so that eventually we will have a post-human species that they see really on the near horizon. And even some of the peer-reviewed journals, and then even some of the more, I guess, sexier forms of media are talking about how within even the next 10 years we will have the first truly transhuman species walking among us. We're already seeing this at the embryonic level. It's already happening with genetically modified crops. It's already getting into the environment. But had I gave that lecture, I wanted to focus not just on transhuman aspirations, but the prophetic implications from my point of view, because it seems to me, and actually in this new book that Dr. Stan referred to, Apollyon Rising 2012, it seemed to me that much of what we're seeing in this science is a repeat of what these old characters call the Watchers did a long time ago in blending humans and animals and DNA and creating a new form of species that became known as the Nephilim, and which brought judgment upon the earth. But we're talking about a technology who at its core originally carried the idea of the incarnating of fallen angels. Now, some may see this all as pure mythology, but I want to tell you a story today about true believers. An occult hierarchy, a title that Dr. Stan has made widely known, that are operating behind the governments of the world, including the government of the United States of America, towards a new world order which will be headed by a personality identified in the Bible, which again Catherine was talking about earlier, known as the Antichrist, the true incarnation of a fallen angel. Now, the best way for me to explain to you what triggered the fall of the dominoes in this research for me is to go back to the beginning. It's always probably best to start at the beginning, right? This was January 20, 2001, when George W. Bush, during his first inaugural address, faced the obelisk known as the Washington Monument, and he twice referred to an angel that rides in the whirlwind and directs the storm. His comments, his references were credited to Virginia statesman John Page, who had written to Thomas Jefferson following the Declaration of Independence, and had said this. He had said, "We know the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. Do you not think that an angel rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm?" 5 weeks after that inaugural, on Wednesday, February 28th, Congressman Major R. Owens of New York stood before the House of Representatives, and he prayed to the angel in the whirlwind, asking this spiritual force to guide the future and the fate of the United States of America. 28 weeks later, for a total of 33 weeks forward from the inaugural, that is 3-3, if any of you might pick up on that interesting occult marker, a terrorist attack, 19 terrorists attacked the United States of America, according to the official record, hijacking 4 commercial airliners, crashing 2 of them into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, another into the Pentagon, and a 4th, which had been directed towards Washington, D.C., crashed in a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. But what happened that day, besides the death, the immediate death of 3,000 or so people and 24 or so missing people, what started that day was the stage, I think, being set for changes to the existing world order. Now, leap forward to Bush's second inaugural speech 4 years later, and he again offers cryptic commentary saying this: "For a half century, America defended our own freedom by standing watch on distant borders. After the shipwreck of communism came years of relative quiet, years of repose, years of sabbatical, and then came a day of fire." End quote. A few paragraphs following, Bush added, "By our efforts, we have lit a fire as well, a fire in the minds of men." For those of you who may already know this, that phrase, "a fire in the minds of men," is from Fyodor Dostoevsky's 19th century book, The Possessed, or The Devils, a novel that was set in pre-revolutionary Russia, where civil resistance is seen being championed by a nihilist by the name of Sergei Negev, who tries to ignite a revolution of such destructive power that society will become unhinged, will be completely destroyed. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the fact that a United States president would would quote a phrase like that in an official speech or record was absolutely astonishing, to many analysts, given that the possessed is about violent government crackdown on dissent that sparks civil unrest and revolution marked by public violence. Furthermore, Fire in the Minds of Men is also a title that historian James H. Billington, as Dr. Monteith has quite often referred to, chose for his famous book on the history of revolutions, including the origin of occult Freemasonry and its influence in the American Revolution, which was also very interesting because in his closing statements, Bush himself referred to the Masonic involvement in the American Revolution, saying, when our founders declared a new order of the ages, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled. Do any of you remember catching that?
When our founders declared a new order of the ages, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled.
When they made this phrase, Novus Ordo Seclorum, they were acting on an ancient hope, an ancient scheme, an ancient plan that evidently hasn't yet been fulfilled at that time, because he said it is still meant to be fulfilled. Well, this phrase, a new order of the ages, is of course taken from the Masonically designed Great Seal of the United States of America, which we'll talk about in a moment. But this was interesting that Bush referred to this as an ancient hope. I guess a hope for some people, maybe a nightmare for others. But to the illumined elite, really, and a handful of historians and scholars, these inaugural addresses by the president were really just important additions in a larger series of carefully crafted speeches in which line-by-line analysis of his public references seemed to be uncovering what appeared to be coded messages that were being sent to somebody. And by the way, I wasn't the only one that saw that. I wrote a lot about it. I wrote about it for WorldNet Daily. I wrote about it for News with Views. Dr. Stan and I talked about it on 2 or 3 shows. About biblical scholar Bruce Lincoln discovered the same thing. Surprisingly, in his examinations of speeches by Bush. In American Dynasty, Kevin Phillips confirmed the same message coding by Bush. And at the top of Phillips' list was reference again to this metaphysical phrase, whirlwind, which he interpreted as representing the voice of God in the books of Job and Ezekiel. Of course, from an esoteric point of view, Phillips was either unaware of or was unwilling to discuss the deeper contemporary meaning of that language and its known importance to secret societies, which we will come to in a moment. But author Bob Woodward noted the same thing in his book, Bush at War, talking about how just 3 days after 9/11, the president began using, in his phrase here, a bizarre mix of Armageddon theology in presidential briefings. In fact, we've learned a lot more about this recently, and how Bush, in fact, may have even been being manipulated. Now, was he in on it? Probably. But at what level did it go even higher than the president? Because we know that there are powers operating much higher than the president. And it seemed that even, Donald Rumsfeld, remember this, that was in the news maybe 6-7 months ago as defense secretary, he was routinely transcribing or adorning top secret memos for both the president and cabinet members during the Iraq War, using prophetic quotations from the Bible. So it absolutely, and of course Donald Rumsfeld is on record as having known religious persuasions or convictions that would be similar to what is known about the Bush family. So it absolutely appeared that there was a hand that was operating behind the president, that was even manipulating the president of the United States, but for what purpose? To what end?
We know the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. Do you not think an angel rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm? Much time has passed since Jefferson arrived for his inauguration. The years and changes accumulate, and an angel still rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm.
For me, when I first was contemplating Bush's angel in the whirlwind references and how that was used to set the stage in the American psyche for this allegorical cosmic conflict between the forces of good and evil, the good United States versus the evil spirit of Babylon. And I was writing about this one day, and I recalled how in 1992, this was a full 9 years before Bush's speech, 9 years before the America was attacked. Former MI6 intelligence officer, Dr. John Coleman, had written a book called The Committee of 300. I don't know if any of you have ever read that, but in it he claims inside knowledge concerning world manipulation by an occult Illuminati elite. And according to Coleman, the angel in the whirlwind is also known as the Mariah conquering wind, and it's actually a title not only are the highest of the occult order known by, but in particular it is a phrase that is used at important moments in time. They're signaling each other. Now, exactly what they were signaling to each other, I don't know, but I will tell you, to researchers like David Bay, my friend who's the director of Cutting Edge Ministries, the signal was clear. The events surrounding 9/11 was, in his opinion, either designed for or was handily used for, after the fact, a catalyst to set the stage for the final stages in the Masonic Baconian dream of the New Atlantis. The New Atlantis, of course, being what Freemason and Rosicrucian adepts of Bacon believed was the goal of the Americas, that the United States was to become the New Atlantis. Now, among other things, I will say this. At an occult level, at a deeply occult level, if before 9/11 leaders of truly dark powers had determined that the ascendancy for the New Atlantis had finally arrived, then occult magical tradition suggests that they might have triggered an event. And this would be something surrounding a mega ritual offering. I mean, are we talking about the people who died on 9/11? I would sure hope not. But it would have to be something powerful enough, according to their belief system, to move, to compel this angel in the whirlwind, these supernatural forces to whom they have made their allegiance. It would have to be something that would instigate a series of events towards a novus ordo seclorum or an ordo ad chaos, a series of events leading us into such chaos that it would bring the world to its knees in hopes of redemption, in hopes of a Savior, in hope of somebody. And I think that had a lot to do with this last presidential election. We don't even care anymore. Just give us the devil. Give us anybody who can save us from where we are headed. It would also have to be something that would embed deeply into the mind, burn unforgettable images into the minds of uninitiated citizens for the purpose of creating contagious memes. Self-replicating ideas that start getting carried from person to person through speech and symbol and rituals and gestures in order to create support for a war on terror and also to create tolerance for diminishing domestic freedoms. Freedoms we wouldn't even have dreamed about a decade ago giving up, but now we're willing to give them up because we need somebody to step in now and save us from the destructive road that we are on. And I will say this, that in addition to Bush's inaugural references to the angel in the whirlwind, and there were other occult things in those inaugurals I don't have time to talk about today, but a thorough examination of the semiosis, of the symbols, of the signals, the things happening on 9/11 and following 9/11 do seem to affirm what linguistic specialists and semioticians that I consulted over the last 24 months in the research for this book, Apollyon Rising 2012. By the way, I finally wound up with 6,000 pages I don't know how many states we visited. I don't know how many scholars and authorities. How do you compress all that into 360 pages? I don't know. We tried to. We just figured nobody's going to want to buy a 6,000 to 8,000 page book. So, and I'm not popular enough to write a series that long to get anybody to read. But we came to believe what they were telling us. There is persuasive evidence of an occult signature marked against 911. There is something there when you begin looking at the symbols and the signs and the numerology that is way too redundant. I mean, for it to have been chance would be in the order of hundreds of millions to one that all of these things that are known to be important to the occult society would turn up in one event. Let me very quickly. That must be what it feels like to have cotton mouth. I wouldn't know. But quickly, some people have pointed out how the number 11 is known as the 11th hour, or the last opportunity to stop an emergency, and how that number turned up over and over again on 911. Other people note how the phone number called during the emergency, 911, matches the date on which the Twin Towers were attacked. But frankly, folks, in occult numerology, the number 11 means much more than that. It is the first master number, and it actually represents a dark vision in occultism. When it is doubled to 22, the vision has been accompanied with action. And finally, when it is tripled to 33, that number again, it means that vision and action have combined to create accomplishment in the world. Therefore, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask if it was not more than mere coincidence that exactly 11 years to the date following George Herbert Walker's New World Order speech, 11 years to the date exactly, on September 11, 2001, Flight 11 crashed into the Twin Towers, which not only formed a Masonic-like pillared gateway, and I wish we had time, and in the book I do spend almost an entire chapter explaining the importance of pillars in Freemasonry and how the occult belief means that you have to move beyond them, you have to move through them in order to produce the accomplishment that you're trying to attain. And then as far as establishing the new Atlantis, it was always the dream of both Bacon and his Rosicrucian adepts that when the day finally came, they'd have to move through those twin pillars of Hercules in order to attain. So they had to move beyond these twin pillars. But let me get back to what I was talking about. By the way, I pastored 25 years. And that's why I've got these notes right in front of me, because I said I have a lot of territory today, and if my body will hold up, I got to get from A to Z and avoid these pig trails as much as I can, or the old preacher will come out and then suddenly we never went anywhere. But the hallelujah, but architecturally, they also configured the number 11. Also consider that Flight 11 hit the Twin Towers first, and Flight 11 had 11 crew members. New York was the 11th state added to the Union. New York City has 11 letters. Afghanistan, the first nation in the United States to attack following 9/11, has 11 letters. George W. Bush has 11 letters. The Pentagon, also attacked on 9/11, has 11 letters. And that list, by the way, goes on so long that pretty soon you start thinking, okay, this either means something, it's the biggest coincidence in history, or those so-called gods that they worship are laughing at us. But could all be coincidence. Another enlightening observation also manifest that day has to do with the number 77. 77 is also a twin master number, but it stood out on 9/11 because of Flight 77 that hit the Pentagon, which is located on the 77th meridian, and the foundation stone for the Pentagon was laid in 1941, guess when? On September 11 in a Masonic ceremony. Now, what could be even more important than those types of bizarre facts is that the number 77 is known as an illuminated signal for the Masonic revenge of Lamech. This is drawn from Genesis 4:23, which says, "And Lamech said to his wives, Cain," how does it go? "If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 70 and sevenfold." Lamech was a descendant of Cain, the first murderer in the Bible, and the father, this is important, of Tubal-Cain. He was a master craftsman. In Masonic tradition, the lineage of Lamech is very important because he is considered to be the forefather of Harim Abif, the first Grand Master, of course, of the Order of Masons and the chief architect of their temple. But the name of Lamech's son, Tubal-Cain, is used as the title for a secret hand grip in Masonic ritual that bestows passage of the 33rd degree or the 3rd degree Master Mason. And ladies and gentlemen, that's more than superficially important, because hand grips in Freemasonry form a Luciferian antithesis to the biblical concept of virtuous power transference or blessings through the laying on of hands. The Mason is actually instructed to follow in the footsteps of his forefather Tubal-Cain. Why? In order to master the seething energies of Lucifer that are in his hands, end quote. Well, let me just read it to you. Celebrated 33rd degree Freemason Manly P. Hall in the Lost Keys of Freemasonry. And Dr. Stan, I believe people can get that book from you. The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. It's not easy to find. I would encourage you to get that from Dr. Monteith. If I start going too long, you just throw something at me. In fact, you know what I did? Where's it at? Put that right there, look at it every once in a while, and pay no attention to what it says. Here's what he said in the Lost Keys of Freemasonry. "The day has come when fellow craftsmen must know and apply their knowledge. The lost key to their grade is the mastery of emotion, which places the energy of the universe at their disposal. When the Mason learns that the key to the warrior on the block is the proper application of the dynamo of living power, he has learned the mastery of his craft. The seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands. And before he may step onward and upward, he must prove his ability to properly apply energy. He must follow in the footsteps of his forefather, Tubal-Cain, who with the mighty strength of the war god hammered his sword into a plowshare," end quote. The relationship between Lucifer, and I don't want to get bogged down in this, but I want you to understand it. The relationship between that and possessing the mighty strength of the war god is explained actually in various Masonic sources as being a reference to the Roman god Vulcan, the son of Jupiter and Juno, who was a sun deity associated with lightning and volcanic fire, to whom human sacrifices had to be made. More important, however, scholarship shows that Vulcan is the extra-biblical version of the biblical story of the fall of Lucifer to the earth in the person of Satan. And most scholars in this field tell us Vulcan, Satan, same identity. The biblical devil is the Masonic Vulcan. So, if the number 77, on September 11, 2001, therefore pointed to revenge upon the United States by the royal bloodline descendants of Lamech, then they were following in the footsteps of Tubal-Cain indeed, releasing the seething energies of Lucifer and the strength of Vulcan or Satan, to whom human sacrifices have to be made. Why? Because movement through the Twin Towers was necessary now to initiate the culmination of the new Atlantis or the New World Order. Now, of course, let me jump forward. Some believe that there has been an occult hand operating in the United States towards a New World Order long before 9/11. For more than 200 years, in fact. And that it can be clearly seen in those signatures of the order upon the country's most famous symbols and landmarks. Let me give you, for instance, of all of the Masonic symbols that date to or associate with the founding of America, 33rd degree Freemason Manly P. Hall again. And by the way, Manly Hall was not just a Freemason. I forget how many thousands of volumes he wrote, hundreds of volumes, how many thousands of lectures he gave, and was considered and is considered probably the greatest philosopher in Freemasonry that ever lived. So here was a man who was qualified to say what he did, and he viewed the Great Seal of the United States of America as the highest signature of occult planning by Freemasons. And here's what he said. He called it, quote, the signature of this exalted body, unseen and for the most part unknown. And then he went on to say the unfinished pyramid upon its reverse side is a trestle board, setting forth symbolically the task to the accomplishment of which the United States government was dedicated from the day of its inception, end quote. Besides Manly Hall, late scholars who recognize the occult symbolism on the Great Seal as pointing to potentially Hall's secret destiny of America included Rhodes scholar James H. Billington, Harvard professor Charles Eliot Norton, who actually described it as hardly other than an emblem of a Masonic fraternity. How's that for a description of the Great Seal of the United States? And even 33rd degree Freemason and noted author James D. Carter, who was a famous Freemasonic author who inadvertently confirmed all of this as well when he admitted that the Masonic symbolism on the Great Seal is clearly known whenever, and I love the way he says this, whenever, quote, an informed Mason examines the Great Seal. I guess that's the difference between a lower degree and a higher degree. And yet for all of the volumes, folks, that was written in the early years about the arcane meaning behind the obvious symbols on the Great Seal of the United States, it was not until the 1930s, and this perhaps by providence, that the significance of the Great Seal of the United States started finding its defining moments. This happened when occult-minded 32nd degree Freemason Henry Wallace, remember him? The Secretary of Agriculture for the United States in 1934, became intrigued with the meaning behind the Great Seal. Now, Wallace had been a disciple of Agni Yogi Society founder and theosophist Nicholas Roerich, whose devotion to mysticism back then all broiled around their belief within this occult society that we were on the verge, or at least their generation would set in motion the movement towards a mystical earthly order that would even have, and here's where transhumanism may come in, that would even have a new breed of people unlike you and I. All of that came to light when Wallace ran as vice president in the 1940 presidential election, and somehow the Republicans got their hands on a series of letters that had been written by Wallace to Nicholas Roerich in the 1930s, addressing him as Dear Guru, and talking about the anticipation that he felt for the breaking of the new day. That was this time when this mythical kingdom was going to arrive on earth. Well, the Democrats barely kept that information from the public, and Wallace went on to become the 33rd Vice President of the United States under the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, himself a 32nd degree Freemason with an equal thirst for mysticism. Though it was Roosevelt who would set in motion the push to get the Great Seal of the United States upon the $1 bill, it was actually Wallace who thought there was something more here, and thought their generation represented something more here, thought that this was a prophecy, and that somehow it was related to the administration of Franklin D. Roosevelt. And in fact, what's now known is that Wallace, they viewed the Great Seal as a prophecy of this New World Order, but they saw the eye hovering above this unfinished pyramid as a Masonic symbol of the grand architect of the universe. And that the kingdom they were trying to build could only go forward when the grand architect of the universe returned. And this would be fitted atop the unfinished pyramid. And then we would have the New World Order. Well, what's now known is that they were actually trying to bring this Messiah forward. Some of this is a little bit almost off the wall here. Meaning, well, let me tell you what Wallace wrote in his memoirs. Am I mesmerizing you? Wake up. Look, you had enough time earlier to get up and get some blood stimulating through the gluteus maximus. You can at least make it 30 more minutes through my lecture.
Amen. Yeah.
If not, maybe wiggle a little bit. And here's what Wallace wrote. It will take a more definite recognition. This is in his memoirs. It's kind of spooky when you think we have people like this running our government, isn't it? It will take a more definite recognition of the grand architect of the universe before the apex stone, that is the capstone of the pyramid, is finally fitted into place. And this nation, in the full strength of its power, is in position to assume leadership among the nations in inaugurating the new order of the ages, end quote. Well, finding or making a more definite recognition, they were looking for him. In fact, both of these men, Roosevelt and Wallace, were fascinated with the idea of a new breed of people, new Atlanteans for the new Atlantis, similar to the contemporaneous exploration by Hitler for the Aryan supermen. And they believed that their super people were going to be led by an earthly Messiah. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if this supernatural leader was to be the incarnation of the Masonic god Osiris, the body or DNA, something, may have been being kept in a coffin, cryptically referred to in correspondence between Wallace and Nicholas Roerich. How many people in the government knew about this? I don't know. But on March 12, 1933, Wallace wrote to Roerich, and here's what he said, quote, "Dear Guru, I have been thinking of you holding the casket, the sacred, most precious casket. And I have thought of the new country going forward to meet the 7 stars under the sign of the 3 stars, end quote. Well, I go into this in my new book explaining what that all means, the 7 stars, the 3 stars, and even the fact that there is some evidence that something may have even been removed from the Giza Plateau. Even Egypt's leading Dr. Zahi Hawass, if you remember in recent years, thought that he found the tomb of Osiris. Telling us, if nothing else, that at least some of the leading experts in the world actually believe that Osiris is based upon a historical figure, and that there are occultists, and among them Freemasons, who have a very strong interest in finding or locating that body, or perhaps they already have, but that in any case, the hope was there by these mystics to resurrect their God, to bring forth their God. Now here's why this is important. Because they were basing this upon the prophecies that are encoded upon the Great Seal of the United States. And therefore it's important for the Great Seal to itself tell us something about this God. Who was this God they believed in? And I don't have time, of course, to go into all the different symbols that are on the Great Seal, and I want to move past this quickly. How much time do I have? How much? 20 minutes? Well, there's no way. I got another 50 pages. Well, anyway. Okay, so 20 minutes, that's going to mean like straight down. Okay. So let's do it quickly. The most indisputable authentication that the Great Seal of the United States symbols and signals are in fact an openly hidden prophecy about the coming of a new world order God. Your Great Seal. It all points to him, but this is the most powerful one, is the phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum. A New Order of the Ages. It was adapted by Charles Thomson in 1782 when he was designing the Great Seal. And according to the official record, Charles Thomson, and by the way, he was a friend of the Masons. People always say, well, it was designed by Charles Thomson. He wasn't a Freemason. He was a very close friend of the Freemasons. He might have been a closet Freemason, and he was certainly a great supporter of Benjamin Franklin's American Philosophical Society. But in any case, he created the phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum from inspiration that he found within a prophetic line. In Virgil's Eclogue 4, line 5, the Latin Magnus ab integro seclorum nascitur ordo, the interpretation of that original Latin meaning, and the majestic roll of circling centuries begins anew. But ladies and gentlemen, this section of Virgil's Eclogue is where the prophecy of the Cumane Sibyl. How popular is the Cumane Sibyl? She sits alongside the Old Testament prophets at the Vatican, inside the Sistine Chapel, and yet she was an Apollinian prophetess, identified in the Bible as a demonic deceiver, a prophetess of Apollo. This is where her prophecy tells us that Jupiter's son, Zeus's son, Apollo, is going to return at some point in the future, according to this pagan prophetess. Apollo is going to return, and that it will be he who will lead this new order of the ages. Let me jump forward and read it to you very quickly from the beginning of the prophecy. Here's what we read. Now the last stage of Cumae Sibyl's song has come and gone, and the majestic roll of circling centuries begins anew. That's where Novus Ordo Seclorum was taken. Justice returns old Saturn's reign, with a new breed of men sent down from heaven. Only do thou at the boy's birth, in whom the iron shall cease, the golden race arise. Befriend him, chaste Lucina, 'tis thine own Apollo reigns. End quote. So according to Virgil and the Cumane Sibyl, I didn't read the entire thing, by the way, whose prophecy formed the Novus Ordo Seclorum on the Great Seal of the United States, the New World Order begins, first of all, if you read the whole prophecy, during a time of chaos. When there's political chaos, the winds and the seas are tossed to and fro. In other words, a time just like today. This is when the Son of Promise arrives on earth, Apollo incarnate, a pagan savior who is born, by the way, as a mixture of men and gods. And if you read her prophecy, it sounds very much like what the Watchers were doing, and also like what's happening in some of our laboratories today, where we are mixing human-animal chimeras, at least at the embryonic level, and I'm suspicious in government-funded laboratories that are beyond congressional review, something much more extensive. But to understand why such a fanciful prophecy about Apollo, the son of Jupiter, returning to earth should be important to you, because in ancient literature, Jupiter is the Roman replacement of Yahweh as the greatest of the gods. His son Apollo is the replacement of Jesus. And furthermore, and this is a very interesting part of this prophecy actually, it says it is justice who returns old Saturn's reign. Saturn, by the way, is the Roman version of Satan. This is on your Great Seal. When the apex of Satan's power comes to rule over the earth, according to the Cumane Sibyl's prophecy, Apollo will return, but he will be returned by justice. Well, of course, justice, this is Lady Justice, blindfolded, holding scales and a sword. All of our courts of law, our justice systems, meaning that she represents the enforcement of secular law, and is the power, according to the Sibyl's conjure, who is going to require global compliance to the zenith of Satan's authority over the earth. Now, some will say, well, Satan has authority over the earth right now. Oh, I know he does, but there is a difference when it says now he has come forward in great wrath. There is a moment coming when these powers are going to be ratcheted up to a level which people have never seen before, and let's hope that people can do as Catherine Ulbrich was saying, Lord, give me strength so I will be able to endure. Now, this is very important. I have 15 minutes, I think. And I'm buying them by the nickel now. You don't know what that means, you'd have to go back to the farm, I guess. The Bible's accuracy along this same line is frightening. Let me read you something very quickly. It's in the New Testament. The identity of the God who comes, the Antichrist, could be viewed as Apollo. The same God repeated on the Great Seal of the United States. Listen to what it says, 2 Thessalonians 2:3. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. And of course, the Greek word perdition, apoleia, Apollyon, Apollo. And by the way, numerous scholarly sources again and again prove that these characters are one and the same. Here's another one, Revelation 17:8. I think ties the coming of Antichrist with the return of this Masonic God on our Great Seal by revealing that the beast will ascend from the bottomless pit and enter him. Here's what it says. The beast thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend from the bottomless pit and go into perdition. Apoleia, Apollo, Apollyon. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundations of the earth, when they behold the beast that was and is not, the beast that was and is not and yet is. I don't know if I can do this in 10 minutes, but I'm going to try. It's not just the Great Seal of the United States that prophesies the return of this God. It's actually encoded on dozens of symbols and icons that belong to the founding of the United States of America. But some of these are huge, and they're right out in the open. Unrecognized by the vast majority of people around the world is, I think, the greatest conspiracy of all time, sitting right out in the open in Washington, D.C., and at the Vatican. It is an ancient, magical, talismanic diagram, the lost symbol, based on the history and cult of Isis, Osiris, Horus, and the prophecy not only of the deity's return, but the mechanism, according to the ancient traditions, that makes it happen. This primeval concept was designed in antiquity for the express purpose of regeneration, resurrection, and apotheosis, for deity incarnation from the underworld to the earth's surface through the combination of two respective figures, which are secrets among the highest occult orders today, but here it is. The dome, the ancient structural representation of the womb of Isis, and the obelisk, the ancient representation of the erect male phallus of Osiris. This original layout of the dome and obelisk, modeled in antiquity, exists today on the grandest scale. I don't have my glasses on. I don't even see what it says.
15 minutes.
Must say, what, 15 minutes? Woo! Somehow I bought another 5. Or maybe 10, I don't know. The grandest scale, it exists at the heart of the capital of the most powerful government on earth, the United States of America, as well as in the heart of the most powerful church on earth, the Vatican. And by the way, I am not here taking any kind of a shot at Catholics. I'm talking about governments and institutions, religious and non-religious, and what they often do in our name, like they're doing now, doesn't necessarily represent me and you. And may God give us a movement across this country that will make that fact turn into tangible results so that we can reclaim what we are quick to lose if we don't. But this pattern ought to be considered, and here's why. If you're like me and you put stock in the Bible, Apostle Paul, John in the book of Apocalypse, the pattern is there that the end times would see a marriage between the political and religious institutions. The political, as in the authority of the Antichrist, and the religious institutions as in the authority of the false prophet. And that these would happen at the return of this character, known in the Bible as Antichrist, of course, in just 2 places where I just showed you, also called Apollo, which is the same deity that's encoded upon your Great Seal. as returning, and by the way, at a particular moment in time. You'll have to read my book to know why I say that. I'm not a date setter, but I can tell you some things that the occultists believe. It therefore behooves open-minded people to consider this grand scale, this pattern, this prophecy in stone that exists in Washington, D.C. and at the Vatican, because it defines the spiritual energy that is either being knowingly or unknowingly invoked in both of those locations. Did you know that the capital of the United States is often called the Mirror Vatican? And that's because of the strong similarity between some of its primary buildings and streets. Well, that's no accident. In fact, the founding fathers first called the capital city of the United States Rome. But the parallelism between Washington and the Vatican is no more clearly illustrated anywhere else other than by the Capitol dome facing the obelisk known as the Washington Monument, and in St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican by a similar dome facing a familiar obelisk, both of which were, according to their own official records, fashioned after the Roman Pantheon, the domed rotunda dedicated to all pagan gods. Now this pattern, a dome temple facing an obelisk, this is an ancient alchemical blueprint that was used by the highest in history, the highest levels of the occult order for one purpose: to generate the resurrection of the God into the personage or the leader of that country or government represented by that individual. Let me do this real quick. For those who may not know it, the U.S. Capitol building, let's see if you knew this, in Washington, D.C., is historically based on a pagan Masonic temple theme. Did you know that? Thomas Jefferson, who shepherded the Roman Pantheon design, wrote to the Capitol's architect, Benjamin Latrobe, defining it as, quote, the first temple dedicated to establishing with Athenian taste the course of a nation looking far beyond the range of Athenian destinies. The Athenian Empire, of course, was first known as Ossyria, the Empire of Osiris. In 1833, Massachusetts Representative Rufus Coyote agreed, saying, we have built no temples but the Capitol. Now why would that be true? Why would the builders have been referring to our Capitol dome as a temple? Well, in 1793, when the cornerstone of the U.S. Capitol building was laid by George Washington in full Masonic garb and ritual, Maryland Grandmaster Joseph Clark was there that day as Grandmaster pro tempore. And to cannon fire, here is what he said, both before and after cannon fire, he proclaimed this loudly: I have every hope that the grand work we have done today will be handed down to as late posterity as the like work of that ever memorable temple to our order, erected by our Grand Master Solomon. The work we have done today, laying the cornerstone of this designed magnificent temple, the capital of our states, by the virtuous achievements of our most illustrious brother, George Washington, end quote. So in other words, ladies and gentlemen, master Freemasons, including George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Pierre Elephant, they designed and dedicated the Capitol building of the United States to be a temple of pagan spiritual energy, modeled after their belief systems based on Isis, Osiris, and Harem-Abib. Now, to understand the significance behind those statements and what it might mean for the future of the world, you have to comprehend how these apparati, the dome and the obelisk facing it, facilitate important archaic and modern protocols for invigorating prophetic supernatural alchemy. Did you follow that? Another 10 minutes. In ancient times, the obelisk was the representation of the missing male organ of Osiris, who was killed by his either brother Seth, and chopped into 14 pieces. All those parts were thrown into the Nile River, where they floated down the Nile River into Byblos. And 13 of those pieces became hung up on the limbs of a tamarisk tree, where Isis found them and started putting them all back together, right? Talk about your super glue. But she wasn't able to find his male organ, which tradition says was swallowed by a fish. Plutarch says it was swallowed by a crocodile. Something swallowed it and it was in the water. But Isis replaced the missing organ with an obelisk and magically impregnated herself with Horus, which is the resurrected Osiris. Well, anyway, that legend is central to Freemasonic belief. Basically, Freemasonic belief is based on that legend. And that legend also formed the core of Egyptian cosmology and was venerated on the most imposing scale all throughout ancient Egypt by giant, towering obelisks, including at Karnak, at the greatest of all of their edifices, the obelisk and dome, as imitations of the deity's male and female reproductive organs, could, through government representation, invoke into existence the being or beings symbolized by them. In my 25 years of pastoring, by the way, one of my specialties was, in fact, I served for 3 years as an exorcist. And to do that required a great deal of study in fields of spiritual warfare, occultism, that sort of thing. And I can tell you there is a precedent for when nations allow their governments to do particular things. They can loose and unloose supernatural realities. If people tolerate it, if they go along with it, if they allow it to happen, your angel in the whirlwind literally can be released and set in motion chaos across the world. These are real powers. Well, the dome and obelisk were very much a part of how the deity would be incarnated in the leader of that capital. I'm trying to figure out here, as I'm standing here, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to wind this down in the next 5 minutes. Through such imitative sex, the dome and obelisk became energy receivers capable of assimilating Ra's essence from the rays of the sun. What does that mean? It means it drew forth the seed. This is in symbolism. This is alchemistry. It drew forth the seed of the underworld Osiris. The seed of the dead deity would, according to the supernaturalism, transmit upward from out of the underworld through the base or testes of the obelisk and magically emit from the tower's head into the womb or dome of Isis. And in that way, according to this magical belief system, Osiris could be born again, the dying and resurrecting God. He can come back over and over. All right, in practical magic, how did Osiris, on rising from the underworld, actually become housed in a human body again? Well, in Egypt, where raising Osiris to life was perfected through these magical constructs, Pharaoh served as the fit extension. He was, by his government position, to become inhabited by the reborn God, to take residence in when the sex act was performed, by the way, at the largest religious structure ever built, the temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak. That's where Pharaoh would go through the festival of Opet and become the inheritor of the resurrected spirit of Osiris. I'm going to jump forward again. Thus Pharaoh was, just as the God ciphered on the great seal of the United States, will be the son and spiritual incarnation of Osiris, the God of Freemasonry. And ladies and gentlemen, in Washington, D.C., the dome and the obelisk stand ready for the metaphysical ritual to be performed in secret by the elite to make sure they are prepared. The magic ceremony has been rehearsed and ritualized in the house of the temple, in the Herodome, by the Supreme Council 33rd degree Freemasonry over Washington, with every passing United States president since George Washington, in anticipation of the ultimate future incarnation of Apollo Osiris. The occult tools they have at their disposal are without comparison. The obelisk in St. Peter's Square in Rome is not just any obelisk. It was one that was removed and took there from the ancient city of Heliopolis, the city of On in the Bible, dedicated to Ra, Osiris, and Isis. In Washington, the obelisk built by Freemasons and dedicated to America's first president is the largest, and I'm not being crude here, in their mythology, size matters. It is the largest obelisk in the world at 6,666 inches high, some say 666.0, and at the base 666 inches wide along each side at the base. What these alchemical utilities will be used for in the near future is not without practice, and it is not without precedent in the United States. Through Masonic alchemistry, presidential apotheosis, that is, the leader of the United States, America's Pharaoh, being transformed into a god within the Capitol Dome or womb of Isis, in sight of the obelisk of Osiris, began with America's most revered and first president, Master Freemason George Washington. As a matter of fact, Masons in attendance at Washington's funeral in 1799 cast sprigs of acacia. Why? Quote, to symbolize both Osiris's resurrection, that is on earth, and Washington's imminent resurrection in the realm where Osiris presides, end quote. Meaning that they truly believed that the new president was becoming Horus. George Washington himself now rises within the underworld to become the Osiris. Let me say this very quickly. Do I have another 5 minutes?
Yeah.
No? 3 minutes. Okay, here we go. Hey, well, all right. So I want to get a little more. When visitors to Washington, D.C. tour the Capitol, one of the unquestionable highlights is to visit the womb of Isis, the Capitol Dome, where, when peering upward from inside Isis's continuously pregnant belly, tourists can see hidden in plain sight the 4,664 square foot fresco officially called the Apotheosis of George Washington. Apotheosis, of course, simply means to deify, to become a god, and by the way also explains part of the reason that U.S. presidents, military commanders, and members of Congress lay in state in the U.S. Capitol Dome, because the womb of Isis is where you go at death to magically be transformed into a god and to experience apotheosis. Those who believe that the United States Capitol was founded on Christianity and visit the Capitol for the first time will be surprised by the stark contrast to historic Christian artwork, for instance, like the ascension of Jesus Christ into the heavens. When they compare that to the heaven that George Washington rises into from within the energized Capitol Dome or womb of Isis, because it is not accompanied by God the Father or Jesus Christ or any of the angels you've read about in your Bible. The heaven that George Washington rises into is occupied by devils, pagan deities, figures important to Masonic belief. These include Hermes, Neptune, Venus, Isis, Ceres, Minerva, and Vulcan, of course, Satan on earth, who provides the energies of Lucifer for the hands of the Masons. All right, I had much more to go, and that's because I was so sick I had no idea how far I was going to make it. Dr. Monteith, thank you for your patience. God bless you, brother.